This week we are reading one of our three short stories for the literary analysis unit. And the first of our three stories is called The Things They Carried. And before you guys kind of read this story, there are a couple of things that I want to address by way in enhancing your reading experience, but also kind of clarifying a couple of things by giving you some contextual background and some historical background, and maybe some biographical background on the author himself. So the first thing that I want to mention is the things they carried. I know that your first inclination when beginning to read this story is to go to the handy dandy Google machine and Google the things they carried in order to find some sort of summary analysis or tool to either A, avoid reading at all costs, or B, help your understanding of what you've read. And the word of warning that I have when it comes to that, I mean, it's fine if you want to read, any of those things, if it helps your understanding of the text, but it is by no means a substitute for having read the text. And the other thing that I want to mention is it's kind of tricky in that the things they carried, the story that we are reading, is a part. It is a short story. It is a part of a larger novel of the same title. So the things they carried, the short story, is the opening chapter of a larger collection of related and kind of fragmented short stories of written by Tim O'Brien about his fictionalized time fighting in the Vietnam War. It was published in 1990 and is one of the first novels published detailing the Vietnam War in a fictionalized kind of way. It has been challenged largely because of its depictions, its gruesome depictions of war and its profanity, and has found itself a number of times, three times that I could find, on banned book lists across the country, specifically for high schools. But while it has been challenged, it has also been praised as one of the finest examples of writing about war. So keep in mind, like I said, that this is the first chapter of a larger work, and it's a fantastic novel if you're interested in continuing your reading. The characters that we meet in this opening short story find themselves in all of, I mean, they're all in the various chapters, so it's kind of detail. It's an introduction to all of them, and we get to see what it's like during their time before, during, and after the war. And Tim O'Brien himself is a character within is kind of his fictionalized account of him as a person in the novel, but we don't meet him necessarily in the first opening chapters because it's about the men that he served with. So that is the kind of background information on the novel. I want to talk a little bit about Tim O'Brien. Tim O'Brien is an award-winning author, best known for his portrayals of the Vietnam conflict. His best known work is The Things They Carried, but he's written a number of other novels on the same kind of topic. He was born in 1946 and spent most of his youth in Worthington, Minnesota. He graduated summa cum laude from Manchester College in 1968, and upon graduation, he was drafted into the Army from not unlike Jimmy Cross. He was drafted, and I do want to mention that probably a majority of the people who fought in the Vietnam War were drafted. They didn't go by choice, but he had some kind of conflicting feelings about serving in the war, which we'll talk about in just a second. But he was drafted and he served as an infantryman with the U.S. Army in Vietnam and won a Purple Heart for bravery after being wounded by shrapnel. After his time in the Army, he went on to study at Harvard and worked as a national reporter for the Washington Post for a number of years. And now he lives in Texas. He teaches and he travels and gives lectures about his writing and gives readings. Fun fact, he was actually in Fredericksburg a couple of years ago reading from his newest novel, and some of my students and I got the chance to go and hear him, which was kind of cool. So all of his works share a similar theme of the imagination as means of survival. So that's Tim O'Brien. And all, like I said, all of his writing focuses on the Vietnam War, and specifically, that is kind of the context of where we are with our story for this week. So I do want to kind of talk just kind of momentarily, not to give a history lesson or anything like that, but I think it's important that we kind of touch on the kind of historical context really quickly, and talk about the Vietnam War or the Vietnam conflict, whatever you want to call it. And I realize that everything that I'm about to say is grossly oversimplifying the Vietnam conflict, because there's so much to know and the ins and outs and all that kind of stuff. But it was a civil war essentially between North Vietnam, the communist side, and the South, the kind of French ruled anti-communist with the United States allies, and all of that, to prevent more independence from the French and the spread of communism. And what's interesting, and I guess I don't want to say what's interesting about what I'm about to say, but what I think will be helpful in understanding kind of the things that Tim O'Brien talks about in his short story, is this idea that the Vietnam War was met with it wasn't necessarily supported by the American public. There were tons of protests. I mean, you look at the Kent State shooting and um, a bunch of other stuff that happened in protest of the war. And a lot of that happened, this kind of anti-war sentiment was fueled and spread mainly because this was really the first televised war that in history, right? Like we had reporters on both sides of the conflict bringing us live coverage and live footage on the battlefront. I mean, it took the front, it brought the front line into the living room. So people were able to see kind of a firsthand account of what was going on over there. And it made things a lot worse, I think, in a number of ways. It showed a bunch of, the civilian shooting. Anyways, I don't want to get into that because I don't want to bore you, but like I said, this was the first televised war, and also it lost favor and support from the American public because it was a highly politicized war. We had politicians with interest in financial gain and the financial gain of the military industrial complex, and this kind of government desire to make money at the expense of the American soldier, who was largely ill prepared to fight. And I guess the one thing that I will say that this kind of this was a time of disillusionment for a lot of people, not only the civilians at home, but also the soldiers over there, because they didn't understand what the American interests were by going and fighting in a civil war. They thought that a lot of people thought that it was, purely an Asian conflict, and America had no business being over there. And because it was kind of micromanaged by the both political and military leaders. For example, you had people, only allotting a certain amount of ammunition given per soldier, right? Um, Essentially, they were sending, young men over there to die. I lost my train of thought. Oh, yes, a crisis of confidence, both in the government and the um, soldiers in and of themselves. Like, what are we going over there? Why are we dying? For what reason? What's the purpose? And you have all of these politicians, both Johnson and Nixon, Democrat and Republican, saying we're winning, and um, really not. But I really digress, and I apologize. I should probably kind of cut this from the video. But I do also want to say that as kind of an aftermath of the Vietnam War, this lack of confidence in the led to a lack of confidence in the government. Returning vets faced negative reactions from both opponents of the war and supporters, along with the physical damage. You have people coming back wounded, largely because people they didn't die on the battlefield. They were able to be safe. But anyways, physical damage, including the effects and exposure to Agent Orange. And also, you had a lot of soldiers coming back with the psychological effects of PTSD. So that's where we're at contextually with the Vietnam War, and maybe give you some kind of insight into the story itself, and the last kind of cultural kind of context that I hope will be beneficial in understanding this story is this phrase called tunnel rats. And tunnel rats, as they are called, or were called, and it wasn't limited to Americans, but Australians were tunnel rats and New Zealanders. But tunnel rats were soldiers who crawled through the Viet Cong underground tunnels. And this was a really dangerous, scary job that these men had to do. The Viet Cong, or the Northern Vietnam Army, they developed this complex system of underground tunnels to combat the enemy. And these tunnels were this kind of sophisticated labyrinth that included hospitals, storage facilities, camps, barracks, anything that the Viet Cong would need in order to live underground for months at a time. It was a way of kind of how, I mean, it was guerrilla warfare, essentially. And to get kind of an idea of what that looked like, right? This is kind of a diagram, but they would have these kind of elaborate tunnel systems where they would live and fight, and it's oddly enough a tourist attraction now in Vietnam. You can go and visit the tunnels, but this is a picture of what of inside of one. Here is another, but also in addition to kind of these living quarters for the Viet Cong, there were booby traps for the enemy, or the people who went down in there, that were kind of filled with gas or explosives or even the less sophisticated venomous snakes. So, like I said, very dangerous job. And while some of men were trained specifically for going into these tunnels, most tunnel rats were devoid of any formal training, and they often went into these tunnels armed with only a pistol or a bayonet, and a lot of times they would have to kind of resort to hand-to-hand combat if they ran into an enemy. So, dangerous job, scary job, and this is the job of Jimmy Cross and his company of men. So, when he talks about going in and drawing straws to see who's going inside the tunnel, this is what he's talking about. He's talking about, going inside and looking into these tunnels, and it's really kind of fascinating. I got a little distracted looking for pictures of tunnel rats to give you guys kind of an idea, but it's kind of fascinating to kind of scroll through these pictures. Here's another kind of look of what it would, a diagram, a hole, um, going in, guy crouching down, but it's really fascinating. But these, when looking at these kind of images or these pictures, like that's kind of the close encounters in small spaces that they would have to kind of go through and look down. Um, Guy coming up, that a gas mask, um, but that is the job of Jimmy Cross and the men and Ted Lavender, and um, them waiting for Lee Strunk to come back up. So that is kind of a historical kind of overview background of our story. Hope this helps in kind of visualizing uh, the story itself, but I am excited to see what you guys think of the story. I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorites to teach. It's one that I teach every semester, saving the fall, because I love it so much. It's ripe for analysis. It's really good. So I'm excited to see what you guys think of the story and what you guys have to say. And I look forward to reading the discussion boards and talking with you guys about the things they carried.